non-executive member of the board of Mercury. Okay, before we start the presentation, okay, Mike, we will show two of our students to get small conversation with you before you start the presentation. The first student is Yoga, and the other is Pradipta. Please, Mike and Yoga.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Yoga, can you introduce yourself first?
Halo, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yoga Dwiguna, and I'm from production engineering and in sub-major of geothermal engineering in the fourth year. Thank you.
Okay. Please, Pradipta.
Good morning, everybody. Please introduce myself.
To apologise on behalf of the New Zealand ambassador who was not able to join us this morning. He sends his best wishes, and I think as many of you, New Zealand has a long association with Indonesia, particularly around geothermal, but also in other aspects, and we'll talk about that shortly. But thank you very much indeed. Idio, would you like me now to go ahead with the presentation?
Okay, please.
So, in renewable energy, geothermal obviously is of key interest, but also to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening internationally. And I'm fortunate enough, as has been mentioned, to be involved in some of the international collaboration on behalf of New Zealand. So, as has been mentioned, I'm an independent consultant. I have a background in chemistry, what you've been studying in the petroleum industry, although I've never been directly involved in that, but obviously around geothermal in particular, with the drilling and some of the exploitation, there are many close linkages into the petroleum industry which are important. I've spent, it says 30 years, but I've actually spent more than 30 years involved in geothermal. I started my PhD on geothermal issues some years ago, obviously. I've spent time based in the United States, running a group which was looking at the opportunities for renewable internationally, and I've had an advisory role to the New Zealand government around renewables more generally, and I've lived internationally. So I thought I'd very quickly show you a little bit about New Zealand. Some of you may know a little bit, but there's a brief introductory video which will follow, just a few minutes, just to give you an idea of the country, some of the things specifically about energy issues. Order things as well. So please.
Decore. Na decore te pō. Ki te whai au, ki te ao marama. Te hei mauri ora.
Welcome to the land of open spaces. A young country rich with natural sources of energy. Geothermal power, the land of open hearts, where we genuinely care for others and strive to protect the land for generations to come. A place where honesty and integrity are valued. And country open to sharing its knowledge with the world. Welcome to the land of open minds, where smart, inspired people work with others to develop sustainable ideas for the future. And brightest. Boundaries to the single industry. Welcome to New Zealand. Never experienced energy like it.
Promotion for New Zealand and tell a little bit about the energy industry, because you have an interest in geothermal. I think that in any country it's important that there's a mix of energy uses, And obviously that's changing for many of us as it is in Indonesia and around the world, we'll talk about a little bit later. So one of the things for renewables generation. So we're the third highest user of renewables in the OECD, and we'll talk about how that's comprised in just a moment. People is that we are looking at maintenance on fossil to minimize carbon emissions. And this year we put into legislation a zero carbon law, which essentially is designed to reduce to close to zero by 2050. And we're quite unique in that is a law that is in place in New Zealand now. So to talk a little bit about the energy markets in New Zealand, because clearly electricity generation and other forms of energy, they need to be produced, they need to be sold. And New Zealand has somewhat of a unique run out of rain or we run out of snow melt. But we have a very long history of hydroelectricity has been important for us for over 100 years. The state's first project was built in the 1900s, and by the 1960s there were major developments in the North Island, and then began to build more plants. But as with many countries, hydroelectricity is environmentally big success. It's in the northern part of New Zealand, and this is because of the volcanic areas. This is what is known as the Taupo Rift. Lake Taupo is in the center here, the offshore island of White Island, where there's a treasure. But this is from a volcanic point of view, and there are some limited geothermal far north of the country, but predominantly the geothermal here in the center of the North Island. If you look at the history of geothermal in New Zealand, it's been slow and it's been influenced by a number of things. Post the Second World War in the 1940s, New Zealand as an island nation was for security supply. We did not have our own oil and gas, and so everything was imported. And it happened that a number of the people who were involved in the Second World War from New Zealand saw what had been done in Italy, where the Italians had developed geothermal energy for their use, and having seen that and being aware of New Zealand, came back to New Zealand and encouraged the government to explore what could be done geothermal in New Zealand. So in the 1960s, the first development was 1% owned by the government and 49% are traded in the stock market. Contact Energy was 25% of the original state-owned power company, but it was fully privatized, and Trustpower is a more recent player in the market. So there's a spread amongst the four major generators, and then there are smaller generators as well. Transpower, which is in the center here and is responsible for transmission, is 100% state-owned. And then the local distribution networks and electricity retailers are generally private sector people with the clearing through the wholesale market. So the wholesale market in New Zealand is a little unique. It's imitated in the Philippines. It's a similar one in Singapore, which obviously has a smaller demand or a smaller arrangement. But essentially, it's a bid-based system. So every half hour, every 30 minutes, the system controller looks for supplies of electricity and where he can purchase them. And in New Zealand, there are about 300 points around the country where electricity can be sold from various generators. And if you could see this, you could see that there are various prices at any one point, any one time. And the price paid for electricity varies through the country. So if there's an excess of hydroelectricity in the south, the price may be very cheap. It'll be transmitted to the north. If there's a limited amount of hydroelectricity, the power in the south may be more expensive and will be transmitted back to the south. So it's a very important market. It drives opportunities for future development, and it provides a stable source of income. Just to show quick, I won't go into this, but this will be online. If you go onto this interconnection here, you can in fact see live information. I hope I don't lose you completely. Hold on for just one moment. So this system allows us to look at what's happening in the power system at this very moment in New Zealand. So you can see our live data in terms of where our generation. You can see what's been happening through. You can see here that we're at about 80% renewable energy. You can see what's happening on the HVDC link, which is the link between the South and the North Island, and how things are moving. And so this is quite an interesting place to go if you have an interest in energy markets. So you can see there where the generation is coming from. See if I can get back to Zoom. Get rid of this, sorry. It's like technological hitch. Get back to live. Okay. Other things that I thought might be of interest, aside from obviously the generation and number of bodies of the system, and these are, some are state, some are private. They're an important part of renewable energy and how we decide what we're going to do. One of the things that we have is we have an energy efficiency and conservation authority. So their role in life is to focus on how to be more efficient, how to look forward to renewable energy use going forward. We also have regulatory bodies that control the market in terms of obviously the wholesale market with protection, the electricity authority. Consumers have a better, and that pricing is reasonable, and that innovation is happening. So they again are working in the interest of the consumer to make sure that electricity price and sourcing is appropriate going forward. And we also have a Commerce Commission, which is a regulatory body that looks at fair trading and consumer credit and contract laws, not just in electricity, but across the energy sector and also in the major sectors of business in New Zealand. So they have a commerce role and they report to the government, and they do have legal powers about fair trading and other things. So just to talk quickly about things beyond electricity. So we use renewable for non-electric purposes, and I've mentioned some of them. New Zealand's not only provide about 17% of our electricity, but they also provide a percent of our primary energy. So the waste heat from geothermal processes is used for, from geothermal generation is used for industrial processing. It's been used for the last 50 years in the pulp and paper industry, and it has increasing use in wood processing. Timber is milled, processed, and then dried for export in the horticulture industry. And more recently, we've started to use geothermal heat and geothermal electricity combined for processing of dairy. dairy products, which are very important to us. I've mentioned already the bioenergy industry, and obviously wooden materials are important sources of heat, and also they're being investigated as sources of biofuels. And while it uses electricity, obviously we're trying to encourage, as I said earlier, the use of electric vehicles so we can reduce our dependence on petroleum products, which are diminishing it, particularly in New Zealand, and reduce our importation. One of the other things that occurs as a byproduct of geothermal in New Zealand is that we're starting to produce quite valuable minerals. There's a project which is now in full commercial operation. It takes the waste fluid from which is in the centre of the North Island, and it's extracting silica very effectively. But what they're doing is they're actually looking at the extraction of lithium. So it closes the loop a little bit. So geothermal, which is renewable, has waste products which can produce lithium, which then can be used for batteries, which then can be used for electric vehicles. So it's quite a nice circle in New Zealand of what we're being able to do in the future. One of the other things that we're doing with our renewable energy is that we're looking at how we can potentially use hydrogen. Given that the cost of electricity is reasonable and is available throughout New Zealand, some people would challenge as to why we would consider hydrogen, but there are some very good reasons to look at hydrogen, because for us, using renewable energy and the opportunity to use electrolysis to produce hydrogen, we can basically have a carbon-free green hydrogen, and the gas can be exported to Japan in future. Heringa, which is I'll show you a little bit more about in a minute, is using wind power to produce hydrogen and has started to produce refueling points through New Zealand. And if you want to get a perspective of the trend, we have a company in terms of cheeses. So Fonterra collects milk from dairy farms throughout the country, and these trucks, which are diesel driven, travel around 86 million kilometres a year. So the opportunity to convert them to hydrogen powered is very significant cost benefits, and also the opportunity to reduce carbon emissions. I won't go into too much detail, but there are a number of hydrogen projects around the country which are being closely watched. But what you might be interested to see, this is a small project which is underway, and it explains why we're looking at hydrogen.
Imagine a world where there are no toxic exhaust fumes from our trucks and cars or greenhouse gases polluting our atmosphere. A world where our factories and vehicles are running on clean, renewable energy and the only emissions are water vapour. A world where our regional communities can thrive with sustainable growth and job opportunities. Balance Agri-Nutrients and Heringa Energy are working together to make that future a reality. We want to make a change that we as a country can be proud of and create a better future for our children and our communities. We have joined forces on a pioneering project that will transition Balance's industrial process plant to run on renewable energy and produce green hydrogen. This project will harness a world-class wind resource right here in South Taranaki. When the wind blows, we will use that energy to transform water into hydrogen and oxygen via a process called electrolysis. Green hydrogen, when combined with oxygen in the air, releases energy that can power trucks and other heavy vehicles, as well as cars and forklifts, even trains and ferries. The only emission produced is a little bit of water vapour. This green hydrogen will be the basis for creating a zero-emission energy and transport hub at Kapuni that will create jobs and economic growth in the region. This innovative project, developed by Heringa Energy and Balance Agri-Nutrients, is reshaping not only Taranaki's but New Zealand's energy future.
So that gives you a bit of background on New Zealand, and I will come back to Yoga, who's keen on the geothermal aspects shortly, but I thought it was worth spending just a couple of minutes to talk about some of the things that are happening internationally in renewable energy. Because often we think that, we're working in isolation and that Indonesia's trying to push geothermal and look at alternatives. But in fact, there's a lot of international collaboration. And renewable energy resources more broadly have been, are getting a lot more interest and attention over the last few years. It's obvious to all of us around the issues of climate change, the inevitable reduction in fossil fuels, and the desire to see that proceed. The other thing is that from a renewable energy point of view, and while New Zealand doesn't have much to do with solar electricity, solar electric generation has made major leaps and bounds in the world and has become very cost competitive. And so you're seeing major developments in solar, which are helping drive the renewable industry more broadly. And there's a lot of international cooperation on renewable energy. Many countries are working together. And one of the groups that I've been involved with for New Zealand is a group called IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is based in Abu Dhabi. The fact that it's in Abu Dhabi is somewhat ironic, given that it's the center of an oil industry part of the world, but the Abu Dhabi provides financial support and support to IRENA, and it has a small but very effective staff there. You'll see its logo around, and I'd encourage you, if you have a general interest in renewables, to look at some of the things that they do. So they produce a variety of information. They look at the global activities of where renewables are, what's happening in the final mix, and you can see how renewables are still quite a small portion of what's happening in the total energy market internationally, but that's growing quite dramatically. And one of the interesting things is that in the last few years, if you look at the grey line, this is the installation of traditional non-renewable energy resources, particularly for electric power generation in the world. And you see in about 2012 that the renewable installations start to exceed the more traditional orthodox. So renewables is very strong internationally, particularly in the wind and solar industries. And in 2018, you can see that renewables are more than half of the installed capacity of new additions going in globally each year. And why is this happening? Well, if you look at the table here, you can see that if you look at the fossil fuel cost range here in the shaded blue area, that the renewables of biomass, geothermal, hydro, solar, wind in particular, and onshore wind more so, are all beginning to compete price-wise. So historically, renewable is not usable. I think one of the things that's happened is a very dramatic change in the price of solar power, and that's due to the reduction in the cost of solar panels. And so from sort of $100 per kilowatt hour to very, very low figures in the other places, solar is becoming quite a major contributor to power generations. And the auctions part of this information is that this is a system of getting international partners to come into the country to bid for it rather than setting tariffs and other things. Finally, because all of you are young and are looking for future opportunities, your focus is on the energy market. It's on the oil and gas industry, but I thought you might be interested to see what's happening globally in terms of opportunities in renewables. And the renewable industry is growing quite dramatically. I think the figures at the moment are there are about 11 million people in the renewable energy industry, and that's growing dramatically. As you can see at the top here, solar photovoltaics take up a large portion of that employment. But there's a whole range of employment opportunities through all of the renewable industries, and I'd encourage you to look more broadly at where you might have interests. Finally, what you might find is useful references and resources around the various sources of energy. These are out of New Zealand, all of them, but I think you'll find them useful sources if you want to get more background. And thank you for the opportunity to share this time with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mike, thank you for your good presentation. Now we are come to the Q&A session. Perhaps Pak Director or Pak Wakil Director have some question regarding the mic presentation, please.
Thank you very much. We give the chance for our students.
Okay. Okay. Yoga and Dita, please have a question. Please go ahead.
Sure, ma'am. Could I have a question? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mike, for the explanation. It's pretty interesting for me that very, very great and hope that it could happen in Indonesia soon. But my question here is, how does New Zealand's government regulate and deal with energy conservation technology? As Indonesia is with many traditional tribes that is maintain nature as the ancestor did. To me, it's pretty challenging in Indonesia and what approach that has been done by New Zealand's government that might be possible to be applied here so that the energy increasingly
Very important question, and it's different in each country. So New Zealand is a little bit unique in that we do have an indigenous population, the Maori population, and the Maori population have, under New Zealand legislation, had a strong position in terms of land ownership and also in terms of their rights to resources. So if you went back 25 or 30 years ago, the first developments that were done in New Zealand, rather obviously hydro and other, the first geothermal developments and hydro developments that were done without consultation with the Maori landowners, and the government had the right to access the areas, to use the land, and to use it with very little benefit to the Maori. That is no longer acceptable, and there is legislation that prevents that. So the rules in New Zealand are such that the geothermal resource is the property of the landowner. Whoever owns the land, if there's geothermal resource below it, then is for development. It does not belong to the Crown as such. So what has been happening, and I mentioned it in the geothermal developments, is that over the last 20 years, they've done some and more recently there have been larger projects with the Maori, for example, in Ngāawaparua, which is a 140 megawatt geothermal plant. The tribe that owns the land on which that plant sits own almost 40% of the equity in that project. So they have 40% of the income from the project, and it's a commercial business. And that's the structure that we have in New Zealand. And that's not easy. So it's possible in New Zealand for a variety of reasons. One is that we have a deregulated electricity market, as I explained. So anybody who has land can develop a power project, whether it's a solar project or it's a wind project or it's a geothermal project. You can develop electricity and you can sell it into the market. So those people that have some particular cultural affinity with the geothermal might want to develop it, or they might want to preserve it. So our legislation around geothermal in particular restricts where geothermal can be developed. So it's a little bit like your national park situation in Indonesia. But the land that is culturally sensitive, geothermally, has been linked to the Maori people. They may have lived on that land. They used it for cooking and processing. There are other pieces of land which still may be Maori owned, that development. There's other land which may be not Maori owned that is available for development. So it's built into the legislation, and the culture is very strong. There is a willingness to make sure that there's a fair sharing of income and other things. And the Maori experience, in fact, has been taken overseas. And one of the ironic ones is that the Maori have been working in Kenya with the Maasai tribes people, because the Maasai tribes people lay claim to some of the areas in the Rift Valley where geothermal is being developed. And so we've been trying. So it's a complicated, but it's something you need to think about. And I know that.
Okay, so sir, it's possible, but still need longer time to apply those kind of regulation here. That's your point.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. There has to be a willingness from the government and use land that Indigenous people have, then there has to be some benefit. May not be huge, but more than just a token, as I say, a school and a mosque, which, it's nice, but, you need some ongoing income, you need to create industry. What are the benefits of geothermal? There are byproducts, so the heat can be used for various things. So maybe that's the way you can help get Indigenous industry going alongside it.
Thank you, sir. Understood.
Okay, thank you, Dita. And then Yoga, please have any question?
Okay. Hello, Mr. Mike. I'm very amazed of how New Zealand commit to have their electricity from renewable energy, and because I studied a lot about the geothermal itself, but I have some kind of interest about the hydropower generation itself. I mean, how could New Zealand commit themselves to generate about a big amount of energy from hydropower itself? While meanwhile in Indonesia, we know that Indonesia also has a big lake or dam, but it is still less generation of hydropower itself. What's your suggestion for Indonesia in generating hydropower itself? Thank you.
Well, I think in New Zealand we are fortunate in that obviously for hydropower you need either rain or you need snow that melts, and so we have a source of. We also have, from a point of view, we have good geology that we can build large hydro dams, and that's been part of what's been positive. As I said, now we've really exploited what we can do. In Indonesia, it again comes down to the fact that hydroelectricity can be quite challenging in terms of land ownership, that you often need to flood a large proportion of land for the lake to retain the water, and that's not always so easy. So there are hydroelectric projects in Indonesia. The geology is not so easy in terms of building earth dams and other things, and the rivers are relatively small, so you don't have large rivers or large flows that you can perhaps use for hydro. 4 p.m. I think there are opportunities for smaller scale development of hydroelectricity in a rural sense in Indonesia, right down to the micro size. I'm not really qualified enough in terms of Indonesia on the larger scale hydro, but it is a challenge around land and basically sort of stability, and you have a lot of very mountainous regions which are not so easy to use for hydroelectric generation in terms of land area and construction of dams. So it's a combination of things, of not necessarily having the rivers, and you obviously have the water supply through the monsoon season, but you don't necessarily have a regular water supply either, which is a challenge for hydro. But small scale, medium scale hydro used for cooperative developments for cities rather than into the grid may well be something that can be considered. And there are a number of those scattered around the country.
Yeah. So I think if the problem is about the land ownership, I think because the land the lake itself is mostly owned by the government itself. So I think the main problem is about the thing you said about the geology and how to build the construction, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is a challenge, and obviously, you know, the arable land with a large population in Indonesia is limited, and there's then competition between, you know, flooding a valley for hydroelectricity as to using it for rice production, for example. So that's always a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mike.
Okay, thank you, Yoga and Mike. Many questions in Q&A column.
There's a couple of questions there that I can see. One's in Bahasa, so I won't try that one. There's a question about COVID-19. Generally, it has not affected the generation industry. Obviously, like everywhere, there's issues around personal safety, contact, but we've been fortunate that the renewable energy or the energy sector has not been too affected. One of the impacts for many countries, of course, is that the the demand has fallen off, and we haven't seen that so much in New Zealand. The demand is beginning to grow again, but obviously the demand could slow down because industries are slowing and demand is slowing, so that there will be some impact on it. But renewables should be favourably placed in that obviously it's a domestic product that you have and you don't have to import it. So there's some commercial benefit or economic benefit to countries. So renewables is still continuing to grow globally.
And maybe next question, Mike. Can you explain about some trouble or problem in geothermal development project for Indonesia, maybe?
So some of the challenges in Indonesia?
Yep.
Well, I think that if you look at there's sort of two branches to any power project development. One is the market and sell any electricity for. And in Indonesia, is a subsidized electricity market, and this has an impact on the price for geothermal. And so geothermal has to be able to compete on a price basis, and that's not always easy. Being approached in some ways in terms of the government with PTSMR help buy down the exploration cost of geothermal, because the early exploration is quite expensive and quite risky, and a recognition that good interpretation. In the petrochemical industry or the petroleum industry, you have a lot of experience on doing microseismicity and seismic work to try and locate oil and gas resources, and that's well proven. In geothermal, it's not quite as simple. So the recognition that you need good quality and thorough exploration to reduce exploration risk is important, because there have been a number of projects where they've been undertaken to a drilling phase and haven't been particularly successful. The other challenge, obviously, logistically in Indonesia is that if you look, and obviously in Java, but in Sumatra, access to geothermal resources is quite challenging. So they are expensive in terms of initial roading and infrastructure before you can get going, which means that projects need to be relatively large. And so the successful projects, or the major successes, have been where joint ventures have been formed between companies that, you know, have the financial skill to take the exploration risk, to do the early development and carry that on their balance sheet, and they pay for that before they go out to borrow from banks and other people. And so you need that combination of significant funding from corporate entities to start the process. In parallel, obviously, PGE, Geodipa, and other people are doing geothermal developments, and they have government funding and government support. So that's the other avenue. So I think the opportunities in Indonesia are obviously significant. The pricing and the cost of development is high. and the tariffs are a bit low. So it's trying to sort out that balance. And in any industry, you need certainty before you can try to do a project. So there's been a lot of upheaval and changes in laws and regulations over the last few years, and that needs to be resolved so that geothermal has a fair footing and gets a fair opportunity. But otherwise, the potential is good. The geothermal industry and experience in Indonesia is high. We've had the privilege of training many Indonesians in the geothermal industry here in New Zealand, and we have many Indonesians who work here in New Zealand with the power companies doing geothermal. So the skills are there, but it's the financial and perhaps technical challenges that need to be recognised and addressed carefully. The social issues, they're there as well, and those have already talked about.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And then we know that PEM Akamiga and New Zealand have cooperated in training. Is there an opportunity to elevate this cooperation, like student internship or docent to study in geothermal?
There is. I mean, obviously it's restricted at the moment because New Zealand is leaving or others coming in. So physically that's difficult, but we are doing a lot of online training. So in geothermal in particular, we have a postgraduate school, the geothermal, which has trained quite a few hundred Indonesians. I've mentioned it's trained 1,500 people from around the world. That does a 3-month course. There's an opportunity to do a Masters of Energy, which can be in geothermal or it can be in renewables and other things. So that's possible. The New Zealand government does provide scholarships, and offline we can give you some information on that. So yes, there are opportunities to study in New Zealand, and at the moment we're trying to figure out how we can run training courses virtually. We have some programs which have been in the past 1-month courses, which basically have brought people down here, 20 or 30 people at a time, and we've trained in geothermal project management and some specific topics, and also in broader renewables. So the answer is yes, the embassy can give you information on that, and we have a very strong relationship with Indonesia, and we'll continue to build on that, I'm sure, going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And next question is from our lecturer, Bu Woro. The question is there any technological challenge by New Zealand in developing renewable industry? Technological challenge.
Well, I think that geothermal industry, that's quite well established. We are looking at different technologies. As I mentioned, the hydrogen industry is something that's quite new to us. The technology is reasonably well established, and but we have to learn how to use our renewable resources to optimize the benefit from that. I don't know that there are major technology challenges for us. Our growth in renewable demand is moderate. Our growth is 2% in electricity demand. What we're more focused on, I think, rather than perhaps newer technology, is being more efficient with what we do. So in trying to minimize the footprint of things, so the use of waste from geothermal, the use of waste from the forestry industry, all of those things, we're trying to find better technologies to use the waste so that, we're more efficient. And that's where there's a lot of emphasis around efficiency. Some of that is, around technology. Some of it's around software and programming and clever technologies and how best to use it. And some of it is the management of the market. So the ability to, as I say, we have time of use, so you can have cheap electricity at certain times of the day. What can you do with that? So the Haringa project, which was highlighted, the hydrogen one, that's quite a clever one, where it's using wind energy when it's not required for power generation to make hydrogen, and when it can sell electricity, it stops making hydrogen. So we're learning to manage the market better and manage the technologies we've got better. That's really what our challenges are.
Okay. Maybe is it clear? And then the question is, how does the electricity price formed in the market, does government has role in determine the electricity price? About electricity price?
No, the electricity price is controlled by the market. The government does not regulate electricity pricing, and the government does not provide any subsidies for the development of renewables. So everything is done on a commercial basis, and electricity is traded in a wholesale market. So essentially, there is a system operator in New Zealand who controls the purchase and dispatch of electricity, and every companies producing electricity offer a price. So they will offer so many dollars per megawatt hour for electricity at a certain country, and the system operator then chooses it. So on average, that doesn't vary particularly much. So as a consumer, my electricity price is agreed between, well, it's offered to me by a distribution company, and it can be fixed for 1 or 2 years in terms of cost per kilowatt hour. So that's done at a mark, and buy my electricity offer different things. So some companies will take a high risk in purchasing the prices and lose. Others will take a very conservative approach. Market. Just say companies. So you can choose which telephone supplier you want to have, you know, how much data how much you want to pay for it, and if you get electricity in New Zealand, and the system, the transmission and the distribution is set up to guarantee that we get electricity reticulated to our house. We have to pay for it, but there's no debate around the actual movement of electricity. It's just where we buy it from, and we can choose and we can change as often as we like in terms of our suppliers if they can get a better price. It's very competitive.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And then Yoga, you still have any question? Please.
Yeah, Mr. Mike. So I have one more question. Actually, it's related to geothermal energy. Actually, I ever read a journal about extraction of mineral, the lithium itself in New Zealand itself, and from what I read is it is still before the things I read is it is still hard to
take out, and we have to put a certain amount of fluid back in. So given that the solids are a very small volume, they don't have an impact. So at the moment, as I say, I'm not familiar with what the rules and regulations are in Indonesia, but so it's the dominant one in New Zealand. And we were talking about that in Indonesia because hydro is not. You have to push very hard to get more geothermal in Indonesia.
Okay. The last question, maybe, any or recommendation for our students to prepare energy or clean energy in geothermal power plant?
Well, I think that, you know, younger people have a better understanding and are more outspoken about the issues of and other things. And there are, as I explained, institutions like IRENA and others talk about the importance of that. But I need to be willing to think outside the box a bit. Some of the opportunities can be quite modest in the solar industry, for example, solar PV. That's one that's quite small and people can set up their own businesses. Obviously, hydroelectricity and geothermal are more difficult to do at small scale. So I think you need to think innovatively. Certainly many Indonesians are very entrepreneurial and I think, you know, are very good at setting up new businesses. Need to be realistic about the opportunities. But as I said, particularly in the solar industry, the price points are very low, so there's opportunity there. So keep an open mind, understand that renewables are important, understand that renewables are part of the solution. So my generation, we were always pushing to say, you know, get rid of fossil fuels, stop using, you have to balance. We need gas. We need a balance. So I think you need to be willing to accept a balance, but can you play a part in the wind industry or solar or others, geothermal? Take the opportunity to get into renewables. It's certainly what's going to be important in future. So that's what opportunities are.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Very inspiring. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, we are come to the last agenda. We would like to say thanks again for speaker, Dr. Mike Allen, and all of the participants. The conclusion of presentation today is New Zealand has diverse renewable energy from geothermal, biofuel, solar, wind, microhydro, and hydrogen cell. So we have a benefit from my presentation and hopefully open our mind regarding this renewable energy to be applied more rapidly in Indonesia. Hopefully, the presentation give benefit for us. Thank you for your attention. See you later. Okay, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bu Nina, time is yours. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ira.
Terima kasih, Bu Erdila. Thank you, Mr. McAllen. Baik, rekan siswa, Bapak. Untuk selanjutnya akan kami persilahkan kepada Direktur PMAK Migas, Bapak, menutup acara ini secara resmi. Kami persilahkan kepada Pak Peri Buan. Pak Peri masih.
Sorry. Thank you, Bu Nina. It's okay. Yeah, okay. On behalf of the Polytechnic of Energy and Mineral Kamigas, I would like to express my appreciation to the speaker, Mr. Mike Allen, for taking time out of your busy duty to share very interesting yet available knowledge about renewable energy in New Zealand. It has been a pleasure to be able to learn the perspective for green energy development in New Zealand. So many renewable sources for electricity generation that will about mutual cooperation between New Zealand with PEMA Kamigas in order to improve our student competencies to cope today's challenge in renewable energy development. I would also like to thank all the panelists, moderator, and participants for your active participation. Thank you very much and good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike, and all the panelists. I give it back to Miss Nina.
Terima kasih.